I've always liked walking at night. There's something about the stillness, the way the air feels cooler, sharper, when most of the city has gone quiet. Some people find it eerie, but for me, it was calming, a way to clear my head. That's why, on a late Friday evening, I decided to take a walk in the park near my apartment. The park isn't anything special, just a stretch of cracked paths winding through tall trees, a playground with rusting swings, and a couple of benches scattered near the pond. During the day, it's full of kids, joggers, and old men feeding birds. At night, though, it's empty. The street lamps around it don't work properly, so most of the place is covered in shadows. I had passed by many times at night, but I had never actually gone inside after dark. That evening, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt suffocating, the walls pressing in on me. I thought maybe a walk would help. I glanced at the clock, just past 11:30. I grabbed my jacket, slipped on my sneakers, and stepped outside. The air was colder than I expected. There was a dampness too, like it had rained earlier, though the ground was mostly dry. The streets were silent, except for the occasional whoosh of a car in the distance. As I walked toward the park, I noticed how the shadows stretched long and thin under the weak glow of the few working lamps. When I reached the entrance, I hesitated. From outside, the park looked darker than I remembered. The tall trees formed a canopy, swallowing what little light there was. The old iron gate was half open, creaking slightly as the wind pushed against it. For a second, I thought of turning back, but I reminded myself, it's just a park, trees, benches, paths, nothing to be afraid of. I pushed the gate wider and stepped inside. Immediately, the air felt different, heavier somehow. The sounds of the street faded, leaving behind only the faint rustle of leaves overhead. My footsteps echoed faintly on the cracked pavement. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and started walking, telling myself to relax. The path wound deeper between the trees, and soon the entrance was out of sight. I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The lamps inside the park were dead, their posts standing like black skeletons against the night. I relied on the pale light of the moon, which filtered weakly through the branches. It was quiet, too quiet. No crickets, no distant cars, not even the usual hum of the city in the background. Just silence, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my shoes. I tried to focus on my breathing, to enjoy the peace, but the stillness felt unnatural. It wasn't calming, it was suffocating. Halfway down the path, I passed the playground. The swings hung motionless, chains clinking slightly in the breeze. The slide gleamed faintly in the moonlight, damp with dew. I stopped for a moment, staring at it. That's when I thought I heard something. It was faint, a sound I couldn't quite place, almost like footsteps, but lighter, slower. I turned quickly, scanning the path behind me. Empty, just the shadows of trees stretching across the ground. I stood there for a moment, listening hard. My heart thudded faster than it should have. Finally, I shook my head and muttered to myself, "You're just imagining things. Get a grip." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling. I started walking again, a little faster this time. My eyes darted from tree to tree, from shadow to shadow, expecting to catch sight of someone, or something, but the park stayed empty. At least, it looked empty. By the time I reached the pond, I realized how far I had come. The water was dark, reflecting only a sliver of moonlight. A bench sat near the edge, its paint peeling away. I lowered myself onto it, trying to breathe normally, telling myself I was being paranoid. But then, across the water, just at the edge of the trees, I saw it. A figure, standing perfectly still. It wasn't close enough for me to see clearly, just a tall shape, half hidden by the shadows. I blinked, leaned forward, trying to focus, but it didn't move. My throat went dry. I told myself it could be a tree, just the angle of the branches playing tricks on me. But even as I whispered that in my head, I knew it wasn't, because I could feel it. I could feel it watching me. I don't know how long I sat frozen on that bench, staring at the shadow across the pond. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe longer. My mind was racing, but my body wouldn't move. The figure didn't shift, didn't step closer, just stood there, half hidden among the trees. I told myself again and again it had to be a trick of the light, some twisted shape of a tree trunk. But deep down, I knew better. There was something unmistakably human about the outline, the slope of the shoulders, the tilt of the head. And the worst part? Even though it was too far for me to see a face, I felt its eyes on me. A tight pressure built in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to leave, get up, walk away. But I couldn't. I kept staring, waiting, almost daring it to prove me wrong, to vanish into the dark like a branch I had mistaken for a person. Then the air shifted. A cold breeze rippled across the pond, carrying with it a faint sound. It was soft, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. A creak, a metallic squeal. I knew that sound. I had heard it before. It was the swing set, the swings, moving. My pulse hammered in my ears. The playground was behind me, just down the path I'd walked past earlier. Slowly, with my breath caught in my throat, I turned my head. In the pale moonlight, one of the swings was shifting back and forth, just slightly. Back, forth, back, forth. But there was no one sitting in it. The chains rattled faintly with each movement, the sound cutting into the silence like a knife. I sat there frozen, the bench suddenly hard and cold beneath me. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Wind. It had to be the wind. Except the trees weren't moving. Not a single branch swayed. The air was completely still. I turned back toward the pond, my stomach twisting. The figure was gone. My breath caught in my throat, and I shot up from the bench, heart pounding so violently I thought I might pass out. I scanned the line of trees, searching for the outline, but all I saw was darkness. The park was empty. At least, it looked empty. I told myself I was done. Enough. Whatever curiosity had pushed me into this place was gone. I needed to leave. Now I stepped back onto the path, moving quickly, my sneakers crunching against the gravel. The sound of the swing still echoed faintly behind me, even as I tried to block it out. I kept my eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to glance left or right. But then I heard it. Footsteps, software behind me. They matched my pace. When I sped up, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed too. My skin crawled. I didn't dare turn around. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but something told me that if I broke into a sprint, whatever was behind me would follow. Instead, I kept my pace steady. My mouth was dry, my breath shallow, but I forced myself forward, one foot in front of the other, eyes ahead. The path curved, leading back toward the playground. I told myself if I reached the street lamps near the entrance, I'd be fine. The thought of the open street gave me a flicker of hope. But as I rounded the bend, I froze. Someone was standing on the swing, not sitting, standing, balanced on the seat, tall and rigid, with their arms hanging limply at their sides. The chains rattled slightly as the swing swayed under the weight. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, head tilted, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. My whole body went cold. Without realizing it, I had stopped breathing. My feet refused to move. I stood there in the middle of the path, caught between the silent figure on the swing in front of me, and the slow, deliberate footsteps echoing softly behind me. I didn't want to blink. I didn't want to move. I felt like I was caught in a trap, standing there with my body locked tight between two impossible choices. In front of me, the figure stood balanced on the swing, head tilted slightly to one side. Behind me, those soft footsteps still echoed, steady and slow, keeping just enough distance to make me feel like I was being herded. The air pressed down heavy against my chest. My legs trembled, but I couldn't run. Every instinct told me that the moment I turned my back completely on either one of them, something would happen. I tried to swallow, but my throat was bone dry. Finally, I forced myself to take a step sideways, keeping both the swing and the path behind me in my line of sight. My plan, if you could call it that, was to slip off the path and cut through the grass toward the edge of the park. I knew the fence wasn't high. If I could just get over it, I'd be back on the street. But the moment my shoe left the gravel and pressed into the damp grass, the swing creaked. The figure shifted. Not much, just a slight bend of the head, like it was watching me adjust my direction. The movement was small, but it froze me where I stood. I forced myself to keep going. One step, then another. Each breath felt like sandpaper in my throat. The grass whispered under my shoes, louder than it should have been. I could hear the crunch of leaves, the faint wet squish of earth. And under it, still, the footsteps behind me, never hurrying, never slowing, always just out of reach. I kept my eyes locked on the swing. The figure hadn't climbed down. It was still there, still balanced impossibly on the narrow wooden seat, its outline sharp against the pale glow of the moonlight. But every few seconds, I thought I saw it sway, not from the swing, but as though its body itself shifted slightly, unnaturally, too fluid for balance. Finally, the fence came into view. My heart leapt, pounding so hard I could hear blood rushing in my ears. The chain-link fence was just a few yards ahead, silver in the moonlight. Beyond it, the sidewalk, the street, safety. I didn't wait. I broke into a run. The grass tore under my feet as I sprinted forward, eyes fixed on the fence. My breaths came fast and sharp, each one a desperate gasp. I didn't dare look back. I didn't dare glance at the swing. All I knew was that I had to get out. When I reached the fence, I grabbed it with shaking hands and scrambled upward. The cold metal bit into my palms, scraping skin as I hauled myself over. I hooked a foot into the chain links, pushed hard, and pulled myself higher. My muscles screamed, but adrenaline carried me forward. Halfway up, I heard it. The footsteps had changed, no longer slow, no longer steady. They were running. Fast, straight toward me. Panic surged through me like fire. I yanked myself over the top of the fence, ignoring the sharp stab of metal digging into my thigh as I swung one leg over. My jacket snagged on the edge, tearing as I ripped it free. I tumbled down the other side, hitting the ground hard on my shoulder. Pain shot through me, but I scrambled up immediately, my vision spinning. I turned back just once, to the park. At the edge of the fence, pressed up against the chain link, stood the figure. Its head was tilted back, eyes, though I couldn't see them, locked directly on mine. Fingers curled tight around the metal links, pale against the dark. It didn't climb, didn't reach, didn't speak. It just stood there. But what froze me to my core wasn't the figure at the fence. It was the swing set behind it. The second figure was there now too, sitting in the swing, perfectly still, facing me. I stumbled back onto the sidewalk, nearly tripping over the curb, and started running without looking back again. My lungs burned. My legs felt like they'd collapse beneath me, but I kept going, block after block, until the park was far behind, and the familiar glow of streetlights surrounded me again. Only then did I stop, doubled over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. Sweat chilled my skin, and every sound, the distant bark of a dog, the hum of traffic far off, felt too loud, too sharp. I told myself not to look back, not even once, but the image was already carved deep into my mind. One figure gripping the fence, another sitting on the swing, both watching. And somehow I knew, deep down, that leaving the park didn't mean I had escaped. By the time I reached my apartment building, my body felt like it was running on fumes. My legs were weak, my throat raw, and every sound in the night made me flinch. Still, the familiar sight of the old brick building brought me a small wave of relief. I kept telling myself, "You're home. You made it. It's over." But it didn't feel over. I stopped at the entrance, hands trembling as I fumbled with my keys. My skin prickled as if eyes were still boring into me, though the street behind me was empty. The quiet should have been comforting, but instead it felt wrong, almost staged. Finally, the lock clicked. I rushed inside, shutting the door hard enough to echo in the narrow hallway. For a moment, I pressed my back against the door, listening, waiting for something. But there was only silence. I climbed the stairs quickly, every step groaning under my weight. When I reached my apartment, I slipped inside, bolted the lock, and collapsed onto the couch. For a long while, I just sat there, breathing, trying to process. My mind raced through everything: the figure by the pond, the swing creaking, the footsteps, the fence. And that last image burned into my brain like a brand. Two figures, one at the fence, one on the swing. The thought made me shudder. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, hallucination, my brain inventing horrors out of shadows. I hadn't eaten much, I was stressed, and it was late. That had to be it. But deep down, I didn't believe it. Still, I needed to feel normal again, to remind myself I was safe. So I forced myself up, went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink, sipping slowly. My hands steadied as the cool water slid down my throat. The bright kitchen light was almost enough to make me believe it had all been in my head. Almost. When I finished, I carried the glass back to the living room, flicked on the TV, and let the noise fill the silence. Some late-night talk show, voices laughing, clapping. It felt distant, unreal, but it was better than the heavy quiet. I don't know how long I sat there, staring blankly at the flickering screen. Minutes, maybe hours. At some point, my eyelids grew heavy, the exhaustion finally catching up with me. I leaned back, pulled the thin blanket from the couch over my chest, and let my eyes close. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost thought I was dreaming. A creak, long, slow, metallic. My eyes snapped open. My heart lurched. It was the same sound I'd heard in the park. The swing. But I was inside my apartment, on the third floor, windows closed, doors locked. I sat up straight, straining my ears. For a moment, there was nothing, just the muffled chatter of the TV. Then, again, creak. Longer this time, drawn out, echoing faintly through the stillness. My blood turned cold. I forced myself to look toward the window. It was cracked, slightly open, the only one I hadn't locked tight earlier, to let in some air. From where I sat on the couch, I couldn't see much outside, just the faint glow of the street lamp, casting weak light on the sidewalk below. Slowly, with my stomach twisting into knots, I stood and crossed the room. Each step felt heavier than the last. I pulled the curtain aside and looked down. The street was empty. At least, it looked empty. The swings in the park were too far to see from here, but I swore I could hear them. That faint, hollow squeal of metal shifting under weight carried on the night air. I slammed the window shut, drew the curtain tight, turned the lock with shaking fingers. But even then, with the window sealed, the sound didn't stop. It grew sharper, clearer, as though it was no longer coming from outside. I turned slowly, dread spreading through my chest like ice water. The creak came again, this time from inside the apartment. My eyes darted to the corner of the living room, to the shadowed space just beyond the reach of the TV's glow. At first, I thought it was empty. Then I saw it, a shape, a figure, standing in the corner, perfectly still, head tilted, watching me. For a moment, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, told myself it was just the shadow of a coat rack, or maybe the outline of a chair. But no matter how much I tried to reason with myself, the truth was clear. There was someone in my living room. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there in the corner, head tilted slightly, as though studying me. The TV's flickering light gave me only glimpses of its outline, tall, thin, rigid. The face was swallowed in darkness, but I could feel it. The silence pressed down on me until I thought my chest might burst. My body felt locked in place, muscles stiff, jaw clenched, heart smashing violently against my ribs. I wanted to scream, but my throat wouldn't work. It was like being pinned under invisible hands. Then came the sound, creak, the faint groan of metal, a swing moving back and forth. But there was no swing here, no playground, no chains. Yet the sound was unmistakable, echoing softly in the stillness of my apartment. It was enough to break me. My survival instincts finally kicked in. I stumbled backward toward the door, hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the lock. The metal clinked under my fingers, and at that exact moment, the figure shifted. It straightened. That tiny, subtle movement, barely even there, was the most horrifying thing I had ever seen. My lungs burned as air ripped out of me in a ragged gasp. I didn't wait for more. The door flung open, and I bolted. The hallway felt endless. My footsteps thundered against the floor, echoing back at me in harsh bursts. Every shadow seemed alive. My ears strained, desperate to hear if it was following. And then, faint, so faint I almost doubted it, came the sound. Creak, the swing, echoing down the stairwell. I ran faster. My legs ached, knees threatening to buckle. But I didn't stop until I smashed through the front entrance and stumbled out onto the street. Cold night air slammed against my skin. I bent forward, clutching my knees, my breath sawing in and out in jagged bursts. The world around me looked normal again, the distant glow of streetlights, the faint roar of cars on the main road, the hum of electricity from a power line. Normal. But when I lifted my head, my stomach turned to stone. It was there, across the street, standing perfectly still under the broken lamp. Its head was tilted slightly, the way someone might watch a stranger from a distance. Even from across the road, even in the half-darkness, I knew it was watching me. I staggered backward, clutching my chest. My body screamed to run back inside the apartment, to lock the door and hide under blankets. But some deeper instinct told me the truth. The apartment wasn't safe. Not anymore. Not ever again. Something inside me shifted, a clarity that cut through the panic. I wasn't going back, not for my clothes, not for my phone charger, not for the photos hanging on the wall. Everything in that place could rot. I didn't care. All that mattered was distance. That night, I walked. I didn't stop to think. I didn't even look back. I just walked, block after block, until the street and that broken lamp were far behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Friends, missed calls, the life I had just abandoned. But I ignored it. I couldn't explain, not yet. The next day, I didn't return, nor the day after. In fact, I never went back at all. I left the apartment untouched, my belongings gathering dust in those four walls I had once called home. I never even canceled the lease. I simply disappeared from that place as though it no longer existed. Instead, I searched for something new, somewhere brighter, somewhere loud, somewhere alive. It took a week, but I found it. A cramped apartment across town, surrounded by noise, neighbors who argued through thin walls, traffic that never seemed to quiet, music spilling from bars on the corner. A place where silence had no room to breathe. And there, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept. Not perfectly. My dreams still flickered with shadows, with fog, and creaking swings. But I slept. And when I woke, the corners of my room were empty. The walls were clean. The only sounds were the muffled life of the city outside. The figure never came back. Months have passed now. Sometimes, late at night, when I let the TV stay off and the room grows too quiet, I feel it again. That weight in my chest, that creeping memory. I'll catch myself glancing toward the corner of the room, half expecting to see it there. But there's nothing. Just silence. And I've learned never to let the silence linger too long. The park, the fog, the swing. I don't go near them. I don't take night walks anymore. When the sun dips and shadows stretch across the city, I stay inside, lights on, music playing, reminding myself that noise is safety. I don't know why leaving the apartment freed me. Maybe that figure had attached itself to that space, feeding on the silence I brought home. Maybe it wasn't me it wanted at all. Maybe it only wanted me gone. Either way, I don't question it. All I know is this: I escaped, and I'll never step foot in that park again.